Hello, welcome to today's webinar, Looking Ahead, Kick Off the School Year Right by Maximizing the Reach of Your School Meals Program. I am Tony Vega-Aiken from the School Nutrition Association, and I will be moderating the webinar along with Maika Sanderson representing the Food Research and Action Center. Maika will go over today's agenda after I explain a few housekeeping items. Before we begin today's webinar, I would like to let you know that today's webinar is 75 minutes with time built in for questions. All webinar attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have a question, please type it into the question box at any time during the webinar. The slide on your screen shows where you can type in a question, and we will do our best to answer your questions at the end of the webinar. In an effort to encourage retention of training information, a short quiz will be provided following this webinar. Everyone on this webinar will receive 1 CEU for attending the webinar upon completion of the short follow-up quiz. So to earn your CEU, you participate in the webinar taking place right now, and then you complete the post-webinar quiz. The link to the quiz will be provided at the end of the webinar and also emailed to you. This webinar has been coded based on professional standards. The professional standards coding is in Key Area 3 Administration and the subcategory of Community Eligibility, and the topic code is 3130. This webinar also has a few handouts for you to download. You may have already read the handouts as they were sent out via email. However, if you have not, please download them now. Locate the handout pane on your control panel. Click on the name of the handout to download. Learning objectives. At the conclusion of today's webinar, participants should be able to identify best practices when designing applications for free and reduced price school meals and know how, where to access related USDA guidance and resources. 2, describe best practices for how to assess the feasibility of implementing community eligibility in schools that qualify for the provision on the lower end of the identified student percentage range. And 3, explain how to best leverage outreach tactics and manage community partnerships to build a successful, sustainable after-school meal program. We're very excited with our today's panel of speakers. With us today, we have Kevin Maskornik, Program Analyst, Child Nutrition Programs, Food and Nutrition Services, USDA. Peggy Bodnar, Food and Nutrition Supervisor, Boise School District, Idaho. And Marla Kaplan, School Nutrition Director, Montgomery County Schools, Maryland.
Thank you so much. Oh, go for it, Tony. Sorry.
Go ahead, Maika.
Thank you, Tony. I guess I was a little excited there. We are so excited to be doing this joint webinar with SNA today. We're so excited to have you all on the call. So for today's agenda, we'll first hear from Kevin Maskornik from USDA. He'll be discussing improving access to school meal benefits through human-centered design and the new school meal application prototype that was made available through USDA last school year. We will then shift gears to talk a bit about the community eligibility provision, which is an excellent way for high-poverty schools to increase the reach of their school breakfast and school lunch programs among their students. Peggy Bodnar from Boise School District, Idaho, will talk to us a bit about that. And then to round out our talk today, we are going to discuss the after-school meals program and best practices for increasing its reach in your school district. So Marla Kaplan from Montgomery County Public Schools, Maryland, will talk a bit about what she's done in her district to do just that. So first, I'm going to kick it off. We'll kick it off with Kevin, as I mentioned, who will be talking about improving access to school meal benefits through human-centered design. Kevin joined USDA and the child nutrition programs in 2012. He works primarily on the community eligibility provision, and his prior work experience in the United States Senate and White House Office of Management and Budget. I've had the personal pleasure of working very closely with Kevin on issues and matters related to CEP, so I'm really excited to hear what he'll be sharing with us today. Kevin?
Thanks, Maika, for that kind introduction. As she just mentioned, my name is Kevin Maskornik. I work on the team responsible for implementing and making policy for the school meal programs at the federal level. I'm here today to spend a bit of time discussing USDA's prototype application for free and reduced price school meals, as well as some supporting materials that are intended to help households and local educational officials complete the application process. And so what are these materials? First and foremost, they are an optional tool that we've developed to aid in the development of free and reduced price school meal applications, or alternatively, be used in place of a state or locally developed application. As you may be aware, USDA does not mandate any particular application format. We do specify, however, some required elements for application forms, but state and local agencies are free to develop their own forms and generally to follow their own design principles. That said, the USDA prototype does have some advantages for maximizing the reach of the school meal programs. For one, we believe that it's broadly reflective of best practices in application design. I'll spend some time pointing out those elements as part of my presentation, and also using either it or a slightly modified version is guaranteed to comply with our statutory and regulatory requirements for the school year in which it is issued. So regardless of how much or how little you plan on drawing from the prototype materials, we think they can serve a useful purpose no matter what. Like I said, these are prototype materials, plural, so it's more than just the application. We also include a parent letter that takes the form of an FAQ. There's an instructions document for the application itself, and we also include a series of materials for local officials, namely verification letters and permission forms for sharing eligibility data with other programs that may be able to provide benefits to low-income households. Next slide, please. Before I launch into a description of what's new this year and also the design best practices on our application prototype, I wanted to just take a moment to talk about where these materials came from, which was a dedicated year-long collaboration with another federal organization called the Lab at OPM. This was a multi-phase project that consisted of a policy review, field research, namely interviews with state and local officials like yourselves, and an analysis of applications designed by state and local agencies, and most significantly, perhaps, a series of focus tests with parents. And so all of this work resulted in a new set of prototype materials that we initially rolled out last school year in 2015-16. Next slide, please. And so the lab at OPM is part of the Office of Personnel Management, which might sound like sort of an odd fit, but OPM actually houses a lot of these cross-cutting initiatives that interact with other federal agencies. Basically, the lab was modeled on think tank organizations in the private sector that focus on innovation in product design and business processes. OPM brings in fellows on a temporary basis to work at the lab, and they often have backgrounds with these other organizations that I just described. The lab primarily employs a development process called human-centered design, or HCD, which is, you'll see on the next slide, flip it over please, is an iterative design process. There's more language on the slide, but in layman's terms, HCD's entire aim is to make things better by prioritizing the needs and the motivations of people who actually use a product or a service. And in this case, that would be household applicants as well as the officials who administer the school meal programs. Next slide, please. There were a couple of reasons why we undertook this project. One, we wanted to better serve you. We recognized that while the old prototype was useful for compliance purposes, USDA was not being a leader in terms of modeling good application design, and we wanted to provide you with something that was more representative of the best practices that were either already being employed in the field or that we could identify through our own research. We also wanted to enhance program integrity and program access by designing an application that makes the process as straightforward as possible for households while minimizing the risk of accidental reporting errors. And last but not least, we simply thought it would be helpful to bring some outside perspectives to the table. So like I said, and just want to reemphasize, these materials are intended to reduce unintentional user error, both on the side of household applicants as well as determining officials. We want our materials to be both accessible and also encourage a high degree of accuracy. And so just to illustrate how much of a difference this redesign made, I want to show you back-to-back slides of our old application prototype, which is displayed on the next slide. Could we advance it, please? And the revised prototype. And so note that this application here is pretty bare bones. It's not necessarily great to look at. It also sprawls across 3 pages, and these don't even include all the statements and surveys that are also required. And so on this next slide, this is the redesign that we released for 2015-16. You'll note that it's much cleaner, it's much more compact. We really think this was a huge improvement over what we had previously, and we were heartened by the generally positive reaction that we received from state and local officials when we published it last spring. Next slide. Okay, and so it's time for a poll. USDA is interested in collecting some informal data on where your free and reduced price application comes from, namely who designs it. And so we expect that in most cases it's going to be the first option, that you do it yourselves or through a contractor just for your school or school district. But we also know that there's states that release prototypes, and in some cases the USDA prototype is used either directly or with some modifications. And so for clarification, if you're using a modified state or USDA design prototype, please select those options. Otherwise, you most likely get your application at the local level. And so we'll give you just a few more seconds to respond, and then we can move on. Okay, and so you can see from these results that there's actually quite a mix. And so some applications are developed at the local level. We expect that a lot of medium to large size school districts might develop their own application, or they might have additional questions or surveys that they want to attach to their application packet. But we know that we also have quite an impact ourselves in terms of folks picking up our application, and certainly state agencies take our materials and develop them for their own purposes, or they develop their own. And so this is a nice representative sample, it seems, that we have here of folks getting applications from different sources. Next slide. Okay, so we'll transition now over to the prototype materials that we just released for school year 16-17. As you'll see on the next slide, the application is broadly consistent with last year's release, though with a few requirements with a few refinements based on state and local feedback. We've also redesigned the prototype application instructions significantly to fit on a single page front and back, down from a 4-page document. And so here's the application form itself. I'm showing these in full for illustrative purposes, but we understand that viewing it on a screen, especially if there's a lot of you in the room, is not ideal. So I want to highlight for everybody that these materials are all available today as handouts for your current and future reference. That includes the application instructions I just mentioned. Originally I had slides showing those too, but I came to my senses figuring I'd just blind everybody with all the small print. But please feel free to take a look at those when you have a chance. On the back side of the application here, it's on the slide now, that also includes some additional information and income reporting, the required race and ethnic survey, the rights statements, and a processing section for reviewing officials. Again, it's more adjustments than wholesale revisions this year. On the front side, the only thing that was totally new was the addition of a grade level identifier in the section where students are listed. We originally had no additional identifiers here, as they aren't strictly necessary to certify a household for free and reduced price benefits. But based on feedback from state and local officials, we heard that these are really helpful for matching students to enrollment lists, and so we've added an additional field. We recognize that some states and districts may prefer a different additional identifier on their applications, but we've included grade as a start. The other two new items were on the back side, as I mentioned previously. The sources of income charts, which I'll discuss in the best practices part, as well as the school district processing box. That was also something that we did not include last year, but again, we were told by a state and local level that they're really quite necessary, so we've added them back in. Just a few things to highlight in terms of requirements on all applications, regardless of their design. These are all explained in detail in the FNS cover memo, which is also included in your handouts, but I wanted to touch on them here. The first is the treatment of zero income reporting. Traditionally, when a household would leave an income field blank or otherwise not report on an income category, they would need to either write 0 or check a box attesting that there was indeed no income. Otherwise, the school would need to reject the application back to the household. What we heard over the years is that this just mostly results in a lot of needless follow-up is in the overwhelming majority of cases, the applicant just didn't have anything to report and didn't realize that they needed to check that box or write a 0. And so we've changed that requirement a bit so that households don't have to actually provide that individual attestation on every line. Rather, there just needs to be a clear and easy to read statement on the application itself stating that if they leave a field blank, it will be treated as a 0, and that signing and submitting the application is their attestation that they can come to report. That procedure is a requirement for 16-17. We rolled it out last year and permitted it in 15-16, but now we want that to be uniform across all application processing, and we anticipate that it will serve to reduce administrative burden for reviewing officials. Second, and this isn't new per se, but please be aware that the survey of race and ethnicity and USDA non-discrimination statement must be on all application forms. The statement was actually updated last November, I believe, so please ensure that what you're using is current. And lastly, for 17-18, not this school year, but next school year 17-18, we're going to mandate that applications are structured in a way that the last 4 digits of the Social Security number are only requested for households applying on the basis of income. It's common to include this field in the signature block, generally the last thing that households complete, but if they're a SNAP or a TAN, if they're a SNAP or a TANF household, for example, and they just provide a case number, they didn't do the income reporting, those households need to be certified for free meals without further application, and they don't need to be asked for that info. And so again, this will be a requirement that will roll out in 17-18, and the reason we're providing this advance notice is to give state and local officials time to make that transition. Now we just want to wrap up by briefly highlighting just a few design elements from our prototype that are optional for you to use, but that we encourage as potentially beneficial. And these are things that we observed from our redesign project or developed on our own. Next slide, please. First, we encourage online applications where available, as those can be neater, thorough, and easier to process. I'll also mention, just as a side plug, for another project that we're undertaking, FNS is actually engaged in a development process for its first web-based prototype application. We intend for that to be a prototype that can be used and adapted by the state and local level, just like our paper application that we currently have. And we are going to draw on the lessons that we learned from our most recent paper application redesign project to inform this one. And so we anticipate being able to release a new electronic prototype as well in advance of the 17-18 school year is what we have it slated for. Second on this slide, we think it's important to provide enough space for student names to be reported in full. Cutting off a first or last name can make it hard to identify the children on the application. And third, try to separate reporting for children, infants, and students from that of adults so as to discourage double reporting. Next slide. Moving on, child income is relatively uncommon. Most children don't have it, so if it's appropriate for your population, we might encourage you to reduce this reporting field to an aggregated reporting line. Doing so can save significant space on the application itself. We also encourage income reporting in whole dollars for all individuals. If whole dollars, well, at least our thinking is that if whole dollars is okay for your tax return each year, if it's okay for the IRS, in most cases that should be sufficient for the purposes of the school meal programs. And whole dollar reporting also has the benefit of simplifying calculations. As an integrity measure, we also encourage an additional field just asking the household to confirm how many household members are present. This should match the number of household members listed out individually, but if it doesn't, that can be a red flag. Next slide. We also encourage you to provide instructions on the application itself to the extent possible. Of course, there is the separate instructions document, but as you may know or at least suspect, not all people read them, and so some help on the application itself can be effective in guiding people. And then more generally, 2 items. One, limit the page count wherever possible. Fewer pages mean lower printing costs for you, and generally shorter is better. 2, use plain language wherever possible. I should mention that all of our materials are designed so that they employ no greater than a middle school reading grade level. I think the average test on these documents tops out about 7.5 reading grade level. Keeping it simple makes it easier to understand. And so that's another best practice we would encourage. And so to close out, just wanted to highlight for you a few housekeeping items before you ask. We do have translations of these documents on the way. We weren't able to do this last school year, so we had to continue to rely on the old prototype packet for foreign languages that year. But this upcoming release will include all materials, not just the application. Publication date should be in the next few weeks, probably early to mid-June, and the application materials will be available in 49 non-English languages. And we hope that you'll be able to use those for the benefit of any populations you serve that are non-English proficient. Last but not least, if you don't grab them from the handouts today, you can always access these materials on the USDA FNS website. Go to our policy memo section and refer to memo SP 24-2016 to review the entire packet. We'll also develop a separate landing page to organize everything once the translations are out. And once again, these are materials that may be used or adapted to any extent you see fit, though they are always to be treated as valid. And so I just wanted to clarify that in the off chance that a household uses this form, maybe they Googled and got our prototype, even if you use a separate application, if they send you a complete USDA app, it does need to be processed. Though, of course, you can follow up to request more information, especially if they missed out on optional survey questions or information sharing requests by virtue of using our form instead of yours. All right, so that's my piece. I just want to thank everybody again for the opportunity to participate on today's webinar. And at this point, I'd like to turn things back over to Maika. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was so helpful. It's really exciting to see all the changes that have been made to the prototype application, and I'm sure that it makes it much easier, not only for school districts to process those applications, but for families to provide accurate information. At this time, we're going to shift gears. I'm really excited to bring to the virtual stage Peggy Bodner, School Nutrition Director for Boise School District. She'll be talking about best practices for maximizing the reach of community eligibility provision, particularly among those schools that may fall at the lower range of the identified student percentage. Next slide. So just a little bit of background on Peggy. Peggy has been the Food and Nutrition Services Director for Boise School District for the past 9 years, so she brings a ton of experience to today's talk. In addition, Boise School District has about 45 schools, and that totals about 26,000 students. Boise started participating in CEP in 17 sites last school year, which was the first year that they were eligible to participate. And now they are doing CEP in a total of 23 different school sites. So at this time, Peggy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Maika. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to all of you about CEP, which I just think is an incredible program. My first exposure to community eligibility was during a LAC a few years ago when only a handful of states were piloting the program. And I was exposed only enough to know that it was something that I was very interested in for our district. So just to let you know, kind of prior to CEP, we had worked our way up to 6 schools within our district that were serving both Provision 2 breakfast and lunch. So that's really important to note moving forward. And all of these were elementary school sites that served breakfast in the classroom. So again, an important note as we moved into CEP. So I'm going to go ahead here and ask a poll question for you. And the question is, what is your CE plans for the 2016-17 school year? So we're just looking to see if you're planning on starting CEP or adding additional sites, whether you're unsure but just still interested, or if you are not planning to participate in CEP. And if you could take a minute to go ahead and answer that poll question. My hope is that you're all participating in CEP and adding additional sites. And if not, I hope so by the end of this presentation that you can see the benefits. All right, so we do have some people that are already participating in CEP because they're going to looking at adding some additional sites, so that's great. And hopefully I've got some people convinced by the end of the presentation to consider CEP and the benefits of the program. So, all right. So when CEP became a national option in 2014-15, it was truly a no-brainer for us at Boise schools. Obviously, when an ISP, which is the identified student percentage, is close to 60%, you can use that with the current multiplier of 1.6 and collect 96% of your meals that you serve as free. So again, pretty much a no-brainer. As I mentioned earlier, we had 6 schools that were already serving Provision 2 breakfast and lunch. And in those cases, we were not collecting free and reduced applications after that baseline year. So we had determined already that these programs were very cost effective for us, and they allowed us to serve obviously many more students. And part of that was through the use of different meal services such as breakfast in the classroom. So if by chance you're already utilizing Provision 2, you've already collected a lot of data that can be used to analyze the impact of cost and revenue and the potential of meal services that can make these programs cost effective. I must say that although the decision and desire to move to CEP was a no-brainer, because it was so new, it was difficult at first. So after much self-education through webinars such as this and reading lots of articles and talking to friends from other districts who had piloted the program, and with our district administrative support, we went ahead and jumped in. The next slide here shows basically our first year of when we were picking our first sites for CEP eligibility. The question there with eligible and potentially eligible, the eligible sites are any of those that are over 40%, with potentially eligible being between 30 and 40%. So we combined all of these elementary schools our first year, along with the alternative high school and 3 small ancillary serving sites for a ISP of 55.86%, or a free reimbursement of 89.4%. So again, pretty much a no-brainer for us. So while we were initially determining these schools, I spent a significant amount of time adding and subtracting schools from my spreadsheet to see the overall impact of that final free and reduced percentage. We used that data to finalize the schools that would be included in that first year. And obviously, Excel is one of my best friends, so because it was really important to play with the combination of schools when you have 45 that are, potentially could be added. It was always my goal to add additional schools. However, we as a district wanted to assure there were no unforeseen negative consequences or potentially a lack of community support, of which we did not have any negative consequences of the community eligibility. So analyzing the profitability was the next real big step into incorporating additional sites. So I used the data from the 14-15 school year to look at the impact on the federal reimbursement, and I also wanted to look at how CEP increased participation and what really was happening to participation. So I also analyzed how much additional labor was needed with the increase in participation and looked at what types of meal services could help maximize participation and therefore increase federal reimbursement. I'm hoping my study will help create confidence in the program. Next slide. There we go. As we look at the slide, and again, as Kevin mentioned, all of these slides will be available so you can kind of look at what has happened to the data. But I'd like to point out that, again, we were already serving breakfast in the classroom at most of the sites that we moved to CEP. So there was not a significant increase in labor as we were already serving many of the kids. So there was some increase in participation, but it was somewhat limited, again, as we had already been serving breakfast and lunch to all students at 6 of our sites. as you can see, the first year we participated in CEP, we had a significant increase in revenue at these sites. Part of that was a result of the years that we did a baseline year for Provision 2 had been rolled for so many years because we were really avoiding doing another baseline year for breakfast. So actually the CEP percentage significantly helped our percent of free reimbursement. So when comparing them to our second year in CEP, we maintained most of the increases that we had in that first year. We did have some movements in enrollments, which can account for some of the decreases this year. And additionally, the ISP and claiming percentages went down some the second year because incorporating the new lower ISP schools. But in the end, the result was still an increase in revenue with little increase in labor. So let's take a look at what happened the second year when we added those new lower ISP schools. So when we start looking at what sites we could add for the 15-16 school year, I was paying close attention to what was happening in our city and specific schools regarding the number of direct certified students. In many cases, direct certification numbers were dropping, which was actually a national trend. So I, was taking that into consideration. There were a few schools we saw increases and that was something to really pay attention to as I was redoing my groupings of schools. As you can see, again, there was a decrease in most of the schools that we were thinking of adding this last year. And as you'll notice, 5 of the 7 schools listed here were only potentially eligible versus eligible. So that's, again, what that means is they were only 30 to 40% ISP percentage. So we were kind of taking a gamble there to try to incorporate them. In hindsight, on my first year, I really wish that I would have had several groupings rather than one large group. And the reason is, as soon as you incorporate new groups into your CEP percentage, you have to reanalyze all the groups and take the most current ISP data. So again, with the drop in the ISP numbers, I wish that I would have made smaller groupings the first year. So I'd like to also note that one of the junior highs here says that it's potentially eligible, but we didn't include it. And the reason why was we found that to date it's more difficult to increase the participation at the secondary school sites with our current meal services. And also at the elementary schools, it's easier to add breakfast in the classroom. So as mentioned earlier, potential increases in participation, next slide please. Potential increases in participation should be considered when analyzing your potential CEP schools. So changes we made the previous year also helped us anticipate increases in lunch participation. So we had good data. We were looking at the history of participation at those school sites. Oops, could you go back a couple? There you go. Okay. And taking into the history of free and reduced percentages, so what was happening at the schools. And then we were looking at adding breakfast in the classroom, breakfast after the bell, and also what kind of grab-and-go options we could have to the meal services. Okay, next slide. So what I did was I estimated the participation based on what we had seen the first year with CEP sites. So as you can see, I estimated a bit high, which was really okay because then it would help us cover our food costs or anticipated increase in food costs and labor. So you can see here what we estimated and then what the actual participation was for this March. On this next slide, it demonstrates how I estimated the labor and food expenses. So looking at this, I estimated what sites would need additional hours increased, and those were basically to add breakfast in the classroom. at those elementary sites. At the secondary sites there, the junior highs, it was to add additional meal service lines during our lunch line. So even with our estimated in food cost and with our labor and benefit cost, we still can demonstrate that it was cost effective. So the next slide. So once again, I used historic data to anticipate increases in participation, which would increase food costs and potentially increase labor costs. And after estimating these expenditures, we had to determine if the ISP percentages how they would affect federal revenue. So again, this was where Excel is my really good friend, and it was a very, very long process. And it meant literally playing with a wide variety of combinations of groups, trying to maximize those percentages in those groups. So as this is just a small sample of the spreadsheet of where I looked at the number of direct cert as part of enrollment to get the ISPs and in numerous different combinations. So again, this is just a small sampling of how we tried to use the data to maximize and crunch numbers. So, so how did I finalize the groups, you're probably asking? Well, one of the things that was important to me is I did not finalize the groups until after school had started. So this allowed me the additional time to see how close my estimates of increased participation actually were. And that was very, very helpful. Now, it's important to remember that I was working with our state child nutrition program, and so they were well aware of the fact that I was working on my CEP percentages. So you definitely would want to work with them to assure that you have the capability of manipulating those percentages after you've initially added them. And the most important part of that is that I did not file a claim until I worked with them to finalize those percentages. So in final analysis, we can look at the next slide, and I truly believe that the program was unbelievably successful. If you look here, it demonstrates the change in participation from 2015, both in percentages as well as revenue generated, and also then includes that increase in expenditures of food and labor, which actually was slightly, I had estimated high, based on, again, the increase in participation that I had really come up with, for an end result of net profit of almost $10,000 a month. So although that may not seem like a lot to some of you, the main reason to remember about CEP is it's making meals more accessible to more students. And that was the primary concern, and all I was really concerned about is trying to break even on this. So in our analysis, this definitely is success. So I hope that this data will be able to provide you with information that can help you analyze whether CEP will work for you. So thank you so much, and best of luck to you that are going to be attempting CEP.
Thank you so much, Peggy. So now what we're going to do is shift gears a bit from the community eligibility provision to the after-school meals program and how you can maximize the reach of that program to ensure that your students are getting access to every meal that's available to them while they are in school. So today we'll have Marla Kaplan from Montgomery County Public Schools to chat with us a bit about her best practices that she's used in her district. So Marla is the director of the Division of Food and Nutrition Services at Montgomery County Public Schools. She received her bachelor's in nutrition and dietetics from the University of Maryland. Marla is also a registered and licensed dietitian who's worked with Montgomery County School System since 1988. So she knows her district very well. In addition, Marla is currently the past board member and past chair for MANA Montgomery County's Food Bank. which has had a really big influence on her career and has really motivated her to devote her career to the elimination of hunger, as well as promoting health and wellness among all populations in her school district. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Marla.
Thank you. It truly is a pleasure to be here and to chat with all of you about all of the programs and services that are available to our students. While Montgomery County, Maryland is thought of as being one of the wealthiest populations in the country, the reality is about 36% of our students are eligible for free and reduced price meals. Next slide, please. So as we look at the availability of USDA programs, one of the things that we feel is extremely important is making sure that we make sure as many students are taking advantage of programs that are available to them. So we know that in our population, we have more than 1 out of every 3 children is potentially going home to not having a healthy supper or not having supper at all. So the importance of outreach cannot be oversimplified. So what does that mean? Well, that means that we connect with schools, with school administrators, with programs, with groups within our jurisdiction, the faith-based organizations, to find out where there are children that are participating in some type of program, either in a school or outside of school, so that we can talk and have that conversation about providing either after-school snacks, after-school suppers, or both to students that have programs that are in eligible areas. And what's important, and yes, I have been here in Montgomery County since 1988, but what's important is don't be misled in thinking that community members or even school principals that have been long in their positions know about these programs. It is, quite frankly, it's amazing to know that even principals that have been in the jurisdiction as long as I have say, geez, I didn't know that that's something that's been available to our students. So don't take that for granted. Next slide, please. And I can't stress more about the importance of partnerships. Quite honestly, the partnerships that we have through the after-school programs, the after-school snack and the after-school supper programs, are partnerships that may have been developed through the summer feeding program. We're feeding and serving the same groups of our population. And so in the partnerships and finding out what programs are located in schools, because they may not be aware of the availability of suppers and snacks. Bring those partners together. If they have a program that is going to happen at an eligible location, a location that is in a school that has 50% or more free and reduced students, or has a feeder school with that level of population, then let's hold that program in one of those locations so that we can pair up. You have the activities, we provide the snacks or the suppers. There is required also a level of flexibility. Our goal is to make sure that we're providing meals and snacks, so we want to be as flexible and as non-rigid as possible to make sure that what we're providing to the kids is in fact what the students want. Next slide, please. So we have to listen. It's not just getting the job done. It's not just knowing that there's a after-school dance camp that's going on in a location and we provide them with a bagged snack or a bagged meal. Yes, it certainly it meets the component, it meets the compliance of our program or the USDA program, but is that really what the students want? And if the students are receiving something that isn't of interest to them, they're not going to eat it. So it's a waste. It's a total waste of our energy, and we haven't accomplished at the end of the day is making sure that they're getting some type of nourishment before they go home. So we did listen, and what we heard was that while the bagged meal, a cold bagged meal was fine, and it certainly once or twice a week was not something that students minded, but every day became somewhat monotonous and boring. So in schools with large after-school programs, we pulled together the coordinators of those programs and kind of pulled them all together and increased the numbers of students that were served. And we opened up our cafeterias and we serve a hot meal. And what we saw was an incredible amount of not only interest on the part of the students, but interest upon the program creators, the program providers, to in fact have more programs because the marriage was working. They found that they had attentive students who were willing to attend programs because they knew that they were getting an after-school supper, and in many cases both, a supper and a snack, that they were being able to consume before they went home. So listening to what the students are telling us is very, very important. Or even if we have a hot meal that's being offered to students, if it's not exactly what the kids want, and tastes vary between schools amongst the district. So listen and make those menu changes. I know it sounds like a no-brainer, but unless you're listening and unless you're reaching out and unless you really want to see the fruits of your work prevail, then you're not going to accomplish at the end what you want to do, which is see that the kids are going home with a full belly. Next slide, please. So again, don't settle for the status quo or mediocrity. Don't just get the job done. Get it done in a way that satisfies the students, and on the other win-win, you're allowing staff at schools or program staff at schools see what your programs are all about, and that will enhance the image of your programs in other areas. Next slide, please. So as a result of some of these best practices, which for the most part for us is to provide a hot meal wherever possible, is to provide the meal at the time that it works for the program's staff. So if school ends at 3 o'clock and that isn't their ideal time, but it happens to be an ideal time for food and nutrition services, work. So we need to gear what we do to align with what programming at the school or at the site is about. Another thing that that we do is we do football teams. They're hungry. In eligible locations, we say that you just need a little bit of homework time or just time to do some type of review of the academic day. That's academic. And for that, then we can provide the football teams or the other sports teams with snack or supper at the end of their school day. So as a result of just listening and the outreach and wanting to do what we could possibly do that would maximize service to students. Next slide, please. In looking at our after-school snacks that are provided, you're going to see a little bit of a range. And actually, from last year to this year, there's an upward blip, but in the past several years, there's pretty much a downward trend. And actually, that's an okay thing, because when you look at the following slide, next slide, please. We look at the after-school supper, and back in 2011, we provided 89,000 suppers for that school year. And if you look at what we have provided so far this school year, we're way into the 300,000s. So we see that what's happening is we're not only providing more programs at more locations, both at school sites and community sites. I failed to mention that. We're not limited to schools. We provide suppers and snacks to community sites, libraries, recreation programs in the community. Now, thus far, those are brag programs because we don't have the kitchen facilities to prepare and provide the hot meals. But for those that we do and are able to provide hot meals, that's what we're doing. And so as you can see, the number of participants in our after-school, the at-risk supper program is exponentially increasing, and that's what we want to do, because we want to make sure that these kids are going home and they've had a healthy meal, because in many cases they're not going to have another healthy meal until they come to school the following day or the following Monday for breakfast. So I hope this provides a level of information to you, and again, it's a pleasure being here with you today.
Great. Thank you so much, Marla. So that is a picture of me, and I wanted to share with everyone that we are going to have a portion for Q&A, but if there are any additional questions or you do not have the contact information for our panelists, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to get your questions funneled to each of the panelists if there isn't enough time to get it through the Q&A portion. To kind of just touch on a few resources that are available on FRAC's website, I just want to go through a few things on the after-school side. So that first link, if you do not have access or do not know where your state agency website is or their contacts, you can use that link. It links you to USDA's webpage, which has contact information for each of the state agencies. Then in terms of snacks to meals, that is a two-pager that was developed by FRAC, which discusses how sites can really move from serving a snack to a full meal, gives some best practices there, so definitely check that out. Serving weekend meals, that's another really fantastic way to expand the reach of your after-school meals program by doing it over on the weekends. So we put together a resource that kind of gives you the tips and tricks on how to do that effectively. It also provides you with ways to kind of calculate the additional revenue that you would be able to pull into your program by extending it through to the weekends. The after-school meal guide, that's another FRAC-produced resource. In there, it covers implementation, outreach, menu ideas, and typical barriers that you may encounter with running an after-school meals program, and of course, the solutions to overcoming those. So please definitely check that out. The after-school standards of excellence, this is typically used by advocates, but I think that school nutrition directors can also just take a look. It's a tool for evaluating after-school sites. So perhaps you're trying to take a look at how you can make your after-school meal site better, more sustainable, have a better impact among the kids, increase participation. Essentially, it would give you the tool to kind of rate your site on the environment, how well are you doing on outreach and getting the word out to your students that you're there and offering meals, and then also taking a look at meal quality and figuring out ways to make the menus as appealing to students as possible. And then last but not least, FRAC holds monthly after-school meals webinars, which are typically held on the second Thursday of each month at 3 p.m. You can find a list of our upcoming after-school meals webinars on frac.org, where you can register and then enjoy the content that we are providing there. Next slide. Then really quickly on community eligibility, I wanted to make sure for those 34% of you that are thinking about doing CEP but are unsure, the first step would be to see what schools and LEAs, well, specifically as a school nutrition director, what schools in your district are eligible for CEP. So those lists have been published by the state agencies and made publicly available. I'm sure you already have that data in-house, but in case to see it on the state agency web, there's the link. We created a map that allows you to click and kind of find exactly where that list is. In addition, we are in the midst of preparing a searchable database that would also kind of make it really easy to find which schools are eligible. Again, I'm sure you all already have that data in-house, so unnecessary for you. And then, of course, FRAC has a host of resources about community eligibility on our webpage. The link is up there. I think one of the things that would be really helpful that really dovetails well with what Peggy shared is that there is a grouping tool available that would help you to kind of figure out the best ways to group your eligible schools so as to maximize federal reimbursement. That could be found on the FRAC website as well on that link that's up there. Next slide. So Tony, I'm going to kick this to you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful presentations. We do have some questions. The first question is, does the new lunch application include student date of birth?
It does not by default include that identifier. Just like I mentioned during the presentation, technically none of these additional identifiers are strictly necessary to do a free and reduced price benefit determination. That said, we understand that additional identifiers can be helpful to local officials when they're matching the student name on the applications to their enrollment lists. And so we put grade as a default, as an additional identifier. Though some districts, we know they use PINs or student ID numbers. In some cases, they'll use the name of the school as an additional identifier. Date of birth is also acceptable, though we would perhaps recommend using a different identifier because it's another piece of personally identifiable information that doesn't necessarily have to be on the application, but there's nothing restricting a state and local agency from using date of birth if they'd like to.
Thank you, Kevin. Another question, if the current proposal in the House moves forward, how do you feel that will affect your CEP programs in general?
Well, this is Peggy, and I'd love to speak with that because we are very concerned on the impact of that. I think it would, my best estimate would be that we'd probably be serving 3 or 4 CEP sites, which would cause us some significant issues. The CEP has actually stabilized our program after the nutritional changes were made. We saw a decrease in participation, and CEP has brought us back up and slightly above our pre-change participation. And so we have significant concerns. That goes throughout our administration as the data is also being utilized for Title I funding and other federal programs. So it will have significant impact on us as a school district.
Thank you. Switching gears a little bit, the question is, who pays for the after-school snacks?
So this is Marla. So all of our programs are entitlement funds. So every meal, be it breakfast, lunch, after-school snack, or supper, or summer meal, every meal that's a compliant meal is claimed for reimbursement through USDA. So it's through federal funds that support the after-school program, both snack and supper.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
It does. And then another question is, do we always have to serve the after-school meals at the site? And do the kids have to sit there to eat?
A very good question. So the program regulations say that the food must be consumed on site. And quite honestly, if you think about it, it makes sense, because if a student was to leave and put their bag or their food into a backpack and eat it 3 days later, such would be a problem. So the food has to be consumed on site, but it doesn't have to be consumed in the lunchroom. So if, for instance, there's a program going on and it's in various classrooms in a school building or in a place in a community center, it doesn't have to be at one location, but it needs to be consumed at the location that it's being served.
Thank you. Next question is, can you explain the school use only section of the application? How can you determine total income if there are several different periods that household adults are being paid?
Let's see. I was going to ask to go back to the slide with the application, but I can speak to that without a visual aid. The school official use box is precisely that. It's not there for the household. It's there to just serve as a place where the determining official can ultimately record the eligibility status of that household. And so it's not necessarily a calculator tool. We expect that determining officials are going to have to do some conversion tabulations to account for the fact that income can come at different frequencies. And so we've tried to structure the application in a way that minimizes the amount of math that the household has to do, and that in turn could potentially reduce reduce the amount of income frequency conversions that the determining official has to do. But that box is basically just there so the determining official can record how much income the household actually receives, the total number of household members, and it also provides space for a secondary application review as well as a verifying official if the application happens to be selected for the verification sample. But it's not there for the household. It's there entirely just as a record-keeping aid for the school district or the school.
Thank you. The next question is, what if the students are not eligible for free and reduced meals?
That would be Marla. So the way these programs operate for after school is the location is eligible. So if a location, an elementary school, for instance, has a enrollment population at the school that's 50% or more free and reduced, then the programs that are occurring after the end of the school day, all of the students that are involved in those programs are eligible for the meals, the snacks, or the meals. So it's not based on student eligibility, it's based on the area eligibility, the eligibility of the location. If this is a community building that's in the catchment area of an elementary school that has the 50% free and reduced population, therefore that community location or that library or that faith-based area would be also eligible. So it's not the student, it's the location of the building and the population of students within that building.
Terrific, thank you.
Sure.
So the next question is, our food bank provides weekend backpacks for kids at local schools that have high free and reduced lunches. The staff at the school has informed me that they are not able to access the information filled out in the FRL application. Is this a federal rule? And how do you recommend that kids get referred to the backpack program if school staff are not able to access these records?
I can take that one because we also have that program here in Montgomery County, Maryland through the food bank that I'm involved in. And so that is absolutely correct. The free reduced information is not able to be is not able to be provided to staff throughout the school. What is normally done is the counselor or there are at the schools that can usually know which students are more in need, and that is usually how the students are identified to come and get a backpack on Friday afternoon to take home over the weekend. But it is not through the information provided about the free reduced status of those students.
I just want to jump in. That answer is 100% correct, but as another option, if the school wants to try and draw from that data, it is also entirely permissible to ask household permission, and so that's something that you can provide as a release form or as an additional survey question in the application packet. But if the household grants permission for information sharing with our programs and other program officials, then it's permissible, but they wouldn't be able to provide it without express consent from the household.
Thank you. Which program reimburses for the supper program, NSLP or CFP?
CACFP. For the after-school supper program, it's CACFP. For the after-school snack program here in Montgomery County, we use an NSLP, National School Lunch Program.
Thank you. Will the USDA eligibility manual be updated this summer? And if so, what is the expected time frame?
Yes, there will be an update to the eligibility manual. I believe we are hoping to have it released before the first day of the school year. I believe it's targeted for June, though we're still finalizing the updates for the manual. But yes, there will be an updated eligibility manual this year.
Thank you. Next question is, if I am serving the after supper program at the high school, can I promote this program at the elementary school so they will come to eat also?
So the premise of the after-school supper program is that students that are involved in activities at the location, be it a community site or a school, are invited, the programs are invited to participate in the after-school program. So it's not a location similar to a summer site where anybody in the community can come and get a meal. These are students that are actually involved in some kind of activity or program with an academic component at the specific school. So the quick answer to your question is technically no.
Okay. Thank you. So we have a question about the new application, the case number. Is there a way to indicate which program of assistance students belong to?
So we tried to make the field on the prototype as flexible as possible. We didn't want to make too many assumptions about how these programs are structured, especially in the case of SNAP. There's a lot of state discretion in terms of how things are structured, what the programs are called even, or sorry, in the case of TANF, I mean. But also with SNAP can carry its own name within state lines, and so what we have here is the federal names of the programs and just a blank space for case number, though there's nothing stopping a state or local agency from restructuring these sections so that they match the needs of their programs. In fact, if there's anything on this application that we expect to be most likely to be modified, it's going to be step 2, the direct certification section or the other assistance program section. Right now, it's a basic section, but there was only so much we could do. Otherwise, it might really conflict with what a state uses for its case number reporting or what it calls its programs. And so, if the way it's structured on the prototype isn't particularly useful, we would invite refinements to be made so that those fields are more useful for state and local purposes.
Okay, a follow-up question to that. If school districts would like to provide feedback on the prototype application, how should they submit that information to USDA?
So we do have public email boxes where questions can come in. I believe there's the CND Internet FNS box, but I'd have to check. But there's always a way to submit information. We actually want feedback on this application form, and so it might be something where I can follow up and just make sure that email address is valid, though typically we've taken public comments and questions through the CND Internet box at fns.usda.gov, but you can always reach us by phone. If you still want to use snail mail, that is also a valid way to get in touch with us, but we do welcome comments and questions about the application. Alternatively, you can also reach out through your state agency, or you can contact your FNS regional office, and they will make sure to forward any questions and comments that you might have.
Thank you. What were some effective methods for getting feedback on the after-school menus from students?
That's easy. As we visit programs and we are visiting cafeterias and we're watching students consume foods, we ask the question, we ask the questions from program administrators. Again, that's the outreach part, the partnership part, and we know by what's on the menu, by what is being served and the number of students that are accepting the meal, and the feedback from the staff that are serving these products to students, what their feedback is. So we're always looking for the comments that our students provide to us, and consequently, as a result, we change the menu and test products. We're always testing products in schools to see what items are more acceptable to students. So there's a very fluid two-way communication process that's used.
Thank you. Next question is, who pays the salaries or the after-school programs and the supper programs? So who pays the salaries for the after-school programs and the supper programs?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned when I shared earlier, when there are large programs in schools is when we open up the cafeterias and serve a hot meal. So we do, the Division of Food and Nutrition Services, because we receive the reimbursement for the meals that are served, and then if there's a sufficient number of meals, what does that number look like? If we're serving more than 35 or 40 children, we're claiming each one of those meals for reimbursement. We will then support by providing and paying the cost of having the employee work and serve the children. So the dollars, it balances. Now, to that end, I will also share that a lot of the menu itself is very simple. It's fruit, or it's juice, or it's a prepackaged vegetable or fruit, and it's a simple entree. It's not a spaghetti and meat sauce. It may be pizza or a burger on a bun or a chicken patty or a fruit plate. So it's a very simple meal, and a lot of the preparation for that meal is done during the regular work day, regular school day. So there's generally only one person that's involved in serving the students, even if there are 200 students, because they're not using the point of sale. We're just accounting for the students that come through the line and receive a meal. So quick answer to that question is Food and Nutrition Services supports the salaries of those individuals.
Thank you. Time for just one more question. My school is a charter school where the school's population is from all over the county, but has a 50% eligibility based on the school's population. Would students be eligible for snacks and after-school dinners if they participate in after-school programs?
Charter schools are treated the same as regular public schools, and if the percentage of free and reduced eligibility is 50% or higher, then yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you all so much. That is all the time we have for questions. So our next step is for our participants to complete the post-webinar quiz, then print out a CEU proof of attendance. You can see that the quiz link is on the screen, but if you do not have a pen, please know that this link will be mailed to you. We do have an upcoming webinar on June 22nd. This is to discuss the new SNA resources to help you meet USDA professional standards. All webinar Wednesdays begin at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we would like to advise you that every SNA webinar is archived in the on-demand library. The on-demand library provides access to over 35 webinars in all key areas, and they can all help you meet professional standards annual training requirements. So please take a look at that when you have a chance. Again, a huge thank you to our speakers for joining us today. Please remember that you must complete the post-webinar quiz to earn your CEU. We will leave this link on the screen for just a few more seconds for you to write it down. But remember, if you cannot write it down, everyone in attendance will also receive an email with the link. Thank you all again for your participation.